Pay attention to 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle on the evening of June 21st, 2013, walking through the bright fluorescent aisles of a Walmart in Jacksonville, Florida. She has hours left to live because a man in a dark van, 56 years old, is watching from just a few feet away, waiting, calculating every move. On this day, Cherish Periwinkle is shopping with her mother and sisters, hoping for something as simple as a new dress. On this day, this man has one intention: to lure this child away from her family and make sure she never comes home. What happens next will shake an entire community to its core, and the warning signs, they were there from the very beginning. It starts not at Walmart, but at a Dollar General store nearby. Rain Periwinkle, a mother of 3 young daughters, is doing what struggling mothers do every day. She is trying to make ends meet, hoping to find something affordable for her 8-year-old girl. The family does not have much money. Rain cannot afford the dress Cherish has her eye on. It is a completely ordinary struggle on what should have been a completely ordinary afternoon. That is when someone takes notice. Rain Periwinkle would later recall the moment precisely. She looked to her right, and there he was, standing in the doorway of the store, staring directly at them. A heavy-set man, middle-aged, with an easy smile and an offer that seemed almost too generous to believe. "You look like you have your hands full," he says. "I have a couple of little ones myself." His name is Donald Smith, 56 years old, and if you think he is just being friendly, think again. Smith tells Rain that he has a $150 gift card to Walmart. He says his wife can drive them all there. He can help this family get what they need. A stranger offering a lifeline to a mother in financial distress. It sounds like a blessing. It is anything but. As one expert would later explain, Smith had spotted a window of opportunity. He saw a vulnerability, a financial insecurity, and he realized he could use it. He could use the promise of money to get time alone with these girls. That was the plan from the very beginning. Rain accepts the offer. The van is the first thing that should have stopped everything cold. It was dark inside. Blinds covered the windows. There was no seat in the middle of the vehicle, and the passenger seat had been pushed all the way down. This is not a family van. This is something else entirely. But Rain climbs in with her daughters, and they make their way to the Walmart. At the store, Walmart surveillance cameras begin capturing everything. And what those cameras show is deeply unsettling. Rain and the girls browse the aisles, picking out clothes, moving through the store with the kind of normalcy that makes what is about to happen feel all the more devastating. Meanwhile, Donald Smith is there too, just watching, standing nearby, observing, not shopping, not helping, just watching. And as each minute ticks by, there is still no sign of his so-called wife. One commentator who reviewed the footage described it as almost unbearable to watch in hindsight. You almost want to reach through the screen and change it, because this is the precise moment, the last moment, before things can never go back. But Rain does not know what we know now. She cannot see what the cameras see. Later in the evening, Smith makes another move. He suggests buying the family a meal from the McDonald's inside the store. Rain, grateful and exhausted, agrees. It is at this point, in this seemingly innocent gesture, that everything changes forever. Cherish follows Donald Smith toward McDonald's to get the food. The surveillance footage from this moment was shown at trial, and the prosecutor described it with chilling detail. There is nothing outwardly alarming about what you see. Smith is not grabbing her. He is not dragging her. He is not forcing her in any visible way. She is walking beside him, a little girl following an adult she has spent the evening with, someone her mother seems to trust. If all you had was that video clip, you might think it was her grandfather taking her to get a Happy Meal, but they do not stay in the store. Donald Smith leads 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle out of the Walmart, through the exit doors, across the parking lot, and directly to his van. They get in, they drive away. And that is the last time Cherish Periwinkle is ever seen alive. Back inside the store, Rain waits. Minutes pass, too many minutes. She checks the McDonald's. They are not there. She walks the aisles. Nothing. Panic begins to rise in her chest, slow at first, then all at once.
Walmart. I'm in Cherish. I think my daughter's been taken.
What do you mean?
Taken by a stranger. I can't find her.
Taken by a stranger, I can't find her. The call is devastating to listen to. Rain's voice carries the specific terror of a parent who already knows, somewhere deep and wordless, that something is terribly wrong. She tells the dispatcher that Smith had said he was going to McDonald's, that he hasn't come back, that the store's McDonald's is closed. I had a bad feeling about him, she says, about half an hour ago. That's the last time I saw her. Then comes something that would haunt this case for years. When police respond to Rain's call, they do not initially classify what happened as an abduction. They categorize it as a missing persons case. Authorities would not inform the media or issue an Amber Alert for at least 6 hours after Cherish disappeared. Legal analysts who reviewed the case later expressed deep concern about this decision. One attorney offered a blunt assessment. Law enforcement may simply not have believed Rain's story. There was scrutiny of Rain herself, questions about her judgment, her decision to get into a van with a stranger, and while that scrutiny may have seemed logical in the moment, it may have cost precious time. Whether finding Donald Smith sooner would have saved Cherish Periwinkle is a question that cannot be answered, but it is a question that lingers. The next morning, police finally track down Donald Smith. He is driving his van on the highway. At the same time, a new call comes in from a concerned resident reporting a suspicious white van that had been parked behind some bushes in the area. The caller had heard a girl was taken from Walmart. They weren't sure if the driver had dumped anything. Investigators follow up on every lead. And then they find the worst. Cherish Periwinkle's body is discovered lying in the marsh of a creek. She is gone. The autopsy would reveal the full horror of what Donald Smith had done. Cherish had been repeatedly sexually assaulted. She had then been strangled to death. She was 8 years old. Donald Smith is arrested and charged with first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping. And as investigators begin to dig into his background, what they uncover adds a layer of fury to an already unbearable case. Donald Smith is a registered sex offender. His criminal history is long and wide, ranging from burglary to battery to crimes specifically against children. On the day he walked into that Dollar General and introduced himself to Rain Periwinkle and her daughters, he was a free man. He had been given chance after chance by a system that kept letting him slide. As one legal expert explained, each individual decision to release Smith may have made sense when viewed in isolation. But taken together, there should have been a moment when the totality of his record demanded a different outcome. He had been given opportunity after opportunity, and he had demonstrated again and again that he was going to reoffend. One attorney summarized it this way: it was as though he had 9 lives. And tragically, it took the murder of an innocent 8-year-old girl for those lives to finally run out. During Smith's background evaluation, experts noted deeply troubling behavioral patterns going back decades. He had reportedly become sexually aware at 5 years of age. He had begun engaging in voyeurism by 10. He suffered a traumatic brain injury with loss of consciousness at 9 years old. These were not isolated red flags. They were the early markers of a man who would spend his life escalating his crimes against children. Smith's trial began on February 12, 2018, more than 4 years after Cherish's death. 4 years of waiting for Rain Periwinkle. 4 years of living with the weight of that night, that van, that choice she made. The prosecution's first witness was Rain herself. She took the stand and told the jury everything. She described the moment Smith approached them at the Dollar General. She told them about the van, about shopping at Walmart, about the McDonald's plan. She testified that when she first started to sense something was off, when Smith offered to buy Cherish adult-style high heels that were completely inappropriate for a child, she had pushed back. She had said no. She had felt the unease settling in her stomach, that quiet alarm that something was wrong. But then she talked herself out of it. I felt foolish after that, she told the jury. I thought I was just being paranoid. The prosecutor asked the question that the entire courtroom had been building toward. Ma'am, when your daughter followed after this defendant toward McDonald's, was that the last time you ever saw your daughter alive? Rain's answer was a single word: yes. The defense's strategy at trial raised eyebrows from the start. In their opening statement, they seemed to signal an intention to cast blame on Rain, to suggest her negligence was part of the story. But when it came time to cross-examine Rain on the stand, Smith's legal team pulled back. Ultimately, the defense called no witnesses and offered no closing argument.
I was slipping and I was so afraid I was gonna fall out and he was gonna find me. He said, I know you're in there, you little bitch, and I'm gonna find you.
In the words of one attorney, tone deaf, insensitive, and ultimately abandoned. But what the jury heard next would eliminate any remaining shadow of doubt. Before the prosecution rested, they played secretly recorded conversations that had been captured between Donald Smith and a fellow inmate while Smith was in jail awaiting trial. The recordings were shocking. In them, Smith casually described his attraction to young girls in graphic terms. He spoke about girls he had noticed at Walmart. He described what he called his parking area, his preferred type of victim. He laughed. He bragged. He talked about these things the way someone might talk about a hobby. Legal analysts were stunned not just by the content, but by the sheer audacity of it. In facing charges of child rape and murder, this man was sitting in a jail cell and speaking freely about his predatory interests as though nothing had happened. One attorney described it plainly. This was not a man who acted on impulse in a single terrible moment. This was someone who had always intended to do what he did. It was planned, it was deliberate. It showed exactly what kind of person he was and had always been. The jury deliberated for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. They came back with a verdict of guilty across the board. First-degree murder, rape, kidnapping. Then came the penalty phase, the question of whether Donald Smith would spend the rest of his life in prison or face the death penalty. Experts took the stand to discuss Smith's neurological history, brain abnormalities visible on imaging scans, a history of being sexually abused himself, and diagnoses that included what was described as orbitofrontal syndrome, characterized by hypersexuality, disinhibition, and an inability to control inappropriate impulses. Defense experts argued these factors should be weighed as mitigating circumstances. Prosecutors countered that neurological issues do not erase moral responsibility. Having a brain abnormality does not mean a person cannot understand the consequences of their actions, they argued. It does not mean they do not know that what they are doing is wrong. And then came testimony that nobody in that courtroom expected. A woman took the stand and told the jury that Donald Smith had tried to kidnap her when she was 13 years old. Years earlier, long before Cherish. She described the moment Smith told her, in explicit and threatening language, to get into his van. When she refused and ran, he chased her. She hid. She heard him outside, threatening her by name, telling her he knew she was there, calling her vile names.
All I knew was, you gotta go. You have to go. I don't care how, you gotta go.
Blaming
Was not the beginning of Donald Smith's predatory behavior. She was, tragically, part of a pattern that the system had failed to stop. The jury recommended death. Judge Mallory Cooper ultimately imposed the sentence. Rain Periwinkle broke down crying when the verdict was announced. But in interviews that followed, she was honest and raw about what justice truly meant to her, or rather, what it could not provide. "It's not justice," she said quietly. "The legal system works the way it works. But he's been living for 5 years after the death of my daughter. And he's going to keep living until the death penalty is carried out or whatever happens. And that's not justice. She didn't get that option to live those many years. There are no words adequate to that grief. And yet, Rain said them plainly, without performance, because they were simply true. But here's the thing. You might think this is where Donald Smith's story ends. It is not. After the conviction, after the death sentence, the world learned even more about the man behind the crime. Recorded jailhouse phone calls between Smith and his mother were eventually released, and in them, Smith seemed almost energized by the attention the case was bringing him. He spoke with excitement about how big his name had become, how much coverage the trial was getting, how many people knew who he was now. One analyst described it as chilling. Smith appeared to view the notoriety as a kind of reward, a collateral benefit from the horror he had inflicted. In those same calls, Smith denied being a child molester. He told his mother that he did not view children as sexual objects. Analysts who reviewed the recordings were blunt about what this represented. It was dishonesty layered over dishonesty. Whether Smith was trying to protect his image with his mother or trying to avoid being labeled in a way that would make him a target among other inmates, the denial was in direct contradiction to everything the evidence showed, including his own words and the jailhouse recordings played at trial. Child molesters in prison face particular dangers from fellow inmates. They are not given protection or priority by corrections staff. Smith knew this, and so he crafted a version of himself for his mother that bore no resemblance to the man the jury had convicted. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation from those calls was what Smith said about why he killed Cherish. In his twisted logic, once Cherish followed him to his van as a registered sex offender, he believed he had no choice. He could not let her go. He could not risk what would happen if she told someone. So he made a decision, a calculated, cold, deliberate decision. "You gotta go," he reportedly said. "You have to go. I don't care how you gotta go. An 8-year-old child. And his response to her presence in his van was this. Legal and psychological analysts who reviewed these statements described what Smith was doing as rationalization, the specific and deeply disturbing way that predators reframe their own crimes in their minds. By telling himself that Cherish's death was somehow her fault, that her presence in the van had forced his hand, Smith was constructing a narrative in which he bore no real responsibility. The child made him do it. That is the warped logic of someone incapable of genuine accountability. And then, in a move that perfectly encapsulates the kind of manipulative thinking that defined his entire life, Smith reportedly asked his mother to obtain a manual on psychiatric disorders. He wanted to study it. He wanted to understand what diagnoses might be useful for an appeal, what mental health arguments might eventually get him out of prison or off death row. As one legal expert observed, that request tells you everything you need to know about Donald Smith. Even facing the ultimate consequence for what he had done, his first instinct was to find an angle, a strategy, a way to work the system one more time. Because that is what he had always done. That is how a man with his history remained free long enough to walk into a Dollar General on June 21st, 2013, and spot a mother and her daughters. The community impact of this case extended far beyond Jacksonville. Parents across the country were shaken. The details of how Smith operated, how he used financial vulnerability, how he appeared friendly and helpful, how he moved slowly and deliberately to isolate his target, became a grim tutorial in the methods of child predators. The delayed Amber Alert raised urgent questions about law enforcement protocols in child disappearance cases. Advocates pushed for reforms to ensure that skepticism about a parent's account would never again delay a search for a missing child. Every hour matters. Every minute matters. The case of Cherish Periwinkle demonstrated that in the most painful way imaginable. And the question of how Donald Smith remained free, how a man with his criminal record and his documented history of predatory behavior was allowed to walk the streets of Jacksonville, became a focal point for discussions about how the criminal justice system handles repeat offenders, sex offenders in particular, and what it means when individual decisions that each seem reasonable in isolation add up to a catastrophic systemic failure. One attorney who analyzed the case offered a thought that has stayed with many people who followed this story. Smith had been given chance after chance, opportunity after opportunity, and every single time, he demonstrated that he would use that freedom to target children. At some point, the system should have looked at the full picture and recognized that this man should not be out on the street. Full stop. For Rain Periwinkle, the years since her daughter's death have been defined by grief, by guilt, by the weight of questions she will carry for the rest of her life. She has been honest about her role in what happened, about the choices she made that night, about the warning signs she noticed and then dismissed. She knows that some people judge her. She does not shy away from that. But those who have spoken most thoughtfully about this case have been careful to make an important distinction. Rain Periwinkle was manipulated by a predator who had spent decades perfecting his methods. He specifically targeted women in financial distress. He specifically watched for vulnerability. He specifically chose the moment and the offer designed to lower her guard. That does not absolve anyone of responsibility. But it demands that we understand who the actual architect of this crime was. Donald Smith, a man who was sexually aware at 5, who began predatory behavior at 10, who left a trail of victims and near victims and criminal charges across decades, who was jailed and released until finally, on a Friday evening in June, he found an 8-year-old girl and a door held open by poverty and desperation and trust. And he walked right through it. Those who remember Cherish Periwinkle speak about her the way people speak about children who left a mark on the world before the world had a chance to receive everything they had to offer. They describe the smile. They always describe the smile, the biggest smile, every time you saw her. Never unhappy, never miserable. Just this radiant little girl with a whole life ahead of her. We will never know what that life would have become. The flowers she might have grown, the dreams she might have chased, the woman she might have been. What we know is this. On June 21st, 2013, she walked into a store in Jacksonville, Florida, with her mother and her sisters, hoping for something as small and simple as a new dress. And a monster in the doorway had already made his decision. Donald Smith sits on death row in Florida. He has exhausted multiple appeals. The recordings of his jail conversations stand as permanent testament to who he was and what he intended. The woman who survived his attempted kidnapping years before Cherish died carries her own scars, her own proof that the system had opportunities to end this before it began. And somewhere in Jacksonville, a mother lives with the memory of that night, with the echo of a 911 call, with the image of her daughter walking toward a man she trusted, toward the McDonald's, inside a Walmart, toward the doors that led outside. The last time she ever saw Cherish alive? If there is one thing this case demands of every parent, every community, every system of justice, it is this. Take the warning seriously. Take the pattern seriously. Take the totality of what someone has shown you about who they are and act accordingly. Because predators like Donald Smith do not announce themselves. They find the door that is already open. They speak kindly. They offer gifts. They watch and wait and calculate. And they count on us not to see them until it is too late. Cherish Periwinkle deserved better. She deserved to grow up. And the smile everyone remembers, that biggest smile, deserves to be the thing that outlasts everything Donald Smith ever was.